So today we're going to be talking about angiosperms. Angiosperms, another name for that, is a flowering plant. Flowering plants are the last to evolve of all the plants. They're also the most successful. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So last to evolve is going to be the angiosperms, and then some flower parts, so you do want to start learning them. You have petals, you have the sepals, you have the carpels, the pistils, the anthers, the pollen, the ovary, the ovules. Those are all parts of a flower that we are going to take a look at on Tuesday, Wednesday, depending upon if you are A or B group, and we'll be dissecting some flowers. So one of the very first land plants are mosses and liverworts, and for these, their dominant life stage is the gametophyte. So basically, they live to reproduce. So as the first land plants, this was really, really important because they produced energy through photosynthesis and they released a lot of oxygen. Well, as they released a lot of oxygen, that allowed for the buildup of oxygen in our atmosphere. So as we continue to build up more and more oxygen, that made life for us to transition from water onto land. And obviously when I say us, not us in the human sense, but other animals as well. Kingdom Plantae does contain chlorophyll, so hopefully all these sound familiar back when we did taxonomy. So Plantae, just in general, does have the chlorophylls. We've talked about that. They are multicellular. They're eukaryotic. They are photosynthetic, so that's how they generate their energy. And their cell walls do contain cellulose. They do make sugars, and those sugars are transported as sucrose, and then they get stored as starches. So when we look at the difference between angiosperms, which we had said are flowering plants, versus gymnosperms, we have a main difference is the seeds. There is a production of seed in both, but with angiosperms, that seed is going to be surrounded by the ovary, and they do have a fruit or a flower present. The fruit and flower does allow for animal interaction and allows for interaction with them, so you get more crossbreeding and you don't have a lot of self-fertilization. Whereas with gymnosperms, they don't, and they actually have to rely on wind pollination or water pollination. So it makes it a lot harder for gymnosperms to reproduce. Whereas with angiosperms, it's a lot quicker. As you look at it, some other different characteristics. Angiosperms can be herbaceous, which again, that is more plant-like material, the greens. It does not produce wood. Or it could be woody, whereas gymnosperms generally are just typically a woody type tree. Okay? If you look at the difference between the two, you're going to see gymnosperms, some of them are extinct, so the cycads no longer exist. Those were dominant during the time of the dinosaurs. Ginkgos, again, I had mentioned that ginkgos almost went completely extinct because, again, they used their dinosaurs to spread their seeds. And then conifers, you still remember those. So typically, gymnosperms are anything that have cones or needles. Angiosperms, on the other hand, are things that are flowering plants. Any of our trees that change colors, so our maples, our oaks, they change colors. They would fall in as an angiosperm. And then there's a couple pictures there for you just to show the difference between the two. So our angiosperms, again, I have mentioned this a couple times, they are our flowering plants. If we look at the evolutionary history, if you can see, there's all these different characteristics that are listed on our family tree right here. You're going to notice there at the very, very end, angiosperms are going to be the last to actually evolve. They are the largest group of land plants, and they are the most important economically to us. And you might be wondering, why are they important economically? Well, there's this really, really important holiday in February that a lot of people enjoy, some people don't, called Valentine's Day. Not only that, people buy flowers all the time to decorate their house, outside, inside. They give flowers on birthdays, on anniversaries. They give flowers when people are mad, when people are sad, when people pass away, or when people are celebrating something like a wedding. So flowers are there a lot. So those apomorphies are characteristics of flowers or of angiosperms that make them unique. Obviously, number one, they do have the production of a flower. They have carpels, and we'll talk about what the carpel is here in a second. They can produce fruits. They have double fertilization, and they have special conductive cells. Fertilization, there's a video after you watch the notes that goes over plant reproduction, and it is a crash course in taxonomy 1. So the guy is kind of weird. You guys know him. So just kind of take it a little bit with an open mind, but he does go over all the different groups of plants and how they reproduce, and he finishes talking about why angiosperms are a lot more successful at reproduction. So flowers, I want you to estimate, think in your head, since you're listening to this, how much do you think here in the United States alone, just the United States, did we spend on flowers for Valentine's Day alone? So not counting in the weddings, not counting in the funerals, not counting in the birthdays, the anniversaries, the I'm sorry, you're mad flowers. How much do you think? Americans spent $2 billion on flowers alone. Just the flowers, not the chocolates, not the jewelry, anything like that. Just flowers, $2 billion, which is crazy. So I want you to think about why are angiosperms so successful. So I've mentioned that a couple times about how they are the most successful today and how they are the last to have evolved. Well, what makes them so successful? One of the facts is that they produce a flower, and they do have a flower, and this has modified leaves. So when we talk about the petals and the sepals, those are modified leaves, which is kind of crazy. In addition to that, the male and female structures that house the gametes are also a modified leaf. I'm going to point out the sepals and petals for you when we get to our picture here in a few, and I'll show you what each of them are. So there's your petals. They're the orange ones. The petals serve as a function to attract pollinators. They sometimes also produce a scent, and that can also attract pollinators. Just below that, the green little leaves, and if you ever get a flower, like picture a rose when it's completely closed up, looks like a little tiny bulb, and surrounding it are these green sepals. Those green sepals kind of serve as a protective covering for the petals as well as all the reproductive structures on the inside. You're going to notice that most flowers do house both the male and female reproductive structure. The male reproductive structure is actually going to be lower in position compared to the female reproductive structure. The female reproductive structure is known as the carpel or pistil. So you'll see it both ways. So carpel or pistil. With the carpel or pistil, so the entire thing right here, that's the female reproductive part. How you can remember this. At the very, very top is the sticky stigma. Sticky stigma allows for where the pollen is going to attach. The pollen then travels down the style. I always think of it as pollen sticks to the sticky stigma, and then women have style. Okay. Down at the bottom, the bulb, the entire thing is the ovary, and with inside are the little ovules that hopefully will all get fertilized. Those then are going to develop eventually into new plants. If you notice the male reproductive structure, which is right here, is called the stamen. That's how I remember that it's the male reproductive part. So again, stamen, I remember it as men. Okay, that's the male reproductive part. You do have a filament, which allows for the anther, which is the top portion that houses all the pollen, to actually extend out and hopefully come into contact with a lot of our pollinators. If you notice, they are located below the female stigma, and the reason for that is to prevent self-fertilization. If the stigma was shorter, let's say it was this tall, okay, a lot of this pollen might fall onto its own stigma. And that's not a good thing. Obviously, you guys know reproduction with people in the same family can cause a lot of issues genetically because the genes are too closely related. Same exact thing would happen when we look at plants. We like genetic diversity. It makes a species stronger. So we do want to have cross-pollination. We don't want to have self-fertilization. That's not a good thing, because anything that that particular organism has that may be a weakness then gets passed on to the offspring. So not only can you have a lot of issues, but some of those genetic traits that maybe aren't as successful automatically get passed on to the next generation and next generation if it continues. Here again is another view of it. So you do want to start learning all these different terms. You do want to know that we have the sepals. Again, those protect the petals. The petals are the colorful pieces that attract our pollinators. We have the female reproductive part called the carpel or pistil. Okay, and you can have the sticky stigma. Women have style. That's how I remember it here. And then down here, there's your ovary, and inside is the ovules. You can see that the pollen in this picture has created a pollen tube, and it goes all the way down and it extends into an ovule, and then the pollen gets distributed into the ovule, and that's when fertilization takes place. All right, so another benefit with the flower is that we are going to attract a wide variety of pollinators, and these animal pollinators are going to actually be co-evolving with our angiosperms. So as the insects, if you notice, insects are one of the largest animal categories or the largest animal groupings on the entire earth, and they are also very successful and have a wide diversity because of this co-evolution with the flowers. A lot of them are able to fly. Okay, so since they can fly, they can transport from flower to flower very quickly. So it's an effective means for the pollen. The pollen gets stuck onto the legs and body of the pollinators, and in return, the pollinators, the bees, the butterflies, the moths, are going to actually get a reward, and they get that nectar. And then they're going to switch to another flower and go get more. And during that time, some of the pollen's going to fall off, and it's going to stick to the sticky stigma. All right, so the benefits with those animal pollination. Obviously, we have flowers that are large and brightly colored. There is a smell, and if you smell flowers, some have a particular smell that smells really good. Others are a little too strong. But then also some plants actually produce rotten odors. And for some reason, that smell, which I think would be repulsive, does attract some pollinators. Ginkgo biloba did produce a rotten smell, and they used large mammals to actually consume and then distribute it, which is kind of gross. So again, this is a mutualistic relationship because that pollinator is going to get a reward. They're going to get that nectar, which is kind of cool. So different organisms that can actually pollinate are bees, butterflies, moths, flies, birds, bats. We can also see water and wind transport pollen as well. Here are just some pictures to go over different types of our pollinators, some examples of flowers that are pollinated by different animals. These ones are for bees, moths, fly, bird, bats. Here's wind pollination, water pollination. So again, it's beneficial to have this relationship with the animals as well as the flowers, again, because we get more genetic diversity, we get more crossing, we have a higher percentage, a greater chance of reproduction, whereas just counting on the wind to blow or just counting on there to be water is not a very successful means of reproduction. Second reason why these plants are so successful, and one of the structures, is that the carpels have completely enclosed and protect the seeds. Okay, so as that actually folded in, remember I had said that this is a modified leaf. So originally this structure, for some gametophytes, which are our early land plants, on the underside of their leaves or their body structure, they had their seeds. Well, over time, it started to curl and curl and curl until it completely fused together. Now, you can have multiple carpels get fused, and when that happens, sometimes you will actually see several stigmas. Not only that, that can actually happen in plants or in fruits. So if you look here, each one of these, that is a carpel. And within each of those are seeds. Obviously, in our lemons and our oranges and our limes, those seeds are a little annoying, but that would be another example of our carpels. So that carpel or pistil, remember, is our female reproductive structure. It does protect the young seeds. It is the site for our pollen germination, and it can actually reject. You know how I was talking about how the anther is lower than the carpel? And that is because we don't want to have that self-pollination. If for some reason some of the individual plant's own pollen was to land on the stigma, it can actually induce self-incompatibility reactions, which basically means it aborts that fertilization and it doesn't allow for that pollen to fertilize their own ovules. The ovary can also ripen into a fruit. And so that fruit, again, is beneficial because then animals are going to consume it. And we had talked about this with seed distribution. If they consume it, it goes through their body, and then eventually they're going to release that waste out. The seeds are able to pass through the entire digestive tract unaffected, and then they have a nice little fertilizer there to start out their life. That self-incompatibility, again, I had mentioned this. Anytime that pollen lands on the stigma, and it recognizes it as self, it will not germinate. Okay, so this actually helps promote genetic diversity, and we are looking for more genetic diversity rather than self-fertilization. For gymnosperms, again, just comparison between, the video does a better job at going through all the different types of reproduction. For gymnosperms, though, fertilization in general tends to take a lot longer. The seeds mature a lot slower. It can take anywhere from 1 to 2 years, whereas with angiosperm, it happens pretty quick after that pollination. So the seeds are produced rapidly, and then we have pollination quickly. So then we see the reproductions, we see the generations over and over and over, and it's quicker. So because of that, that allows for it to reproduce quickly and get more offspring out into the world, and again continue their dominance as being one of the most successful of all the plants here on Earth. All right, so that video is linked in our page, so please take a look at that video. Again, the guy's kind of weird, but he does talk about plant reproduction and the different types of plants and how they reproduce. So please take the time to watch that because it is interesting. I don't need you to memorize everything from what he talks about, but at least to give you an opportunity to see it and hear it before you move on into college. Okay, because when you eventually take a college botany class, they're going to go way more in depth in this than we are right now. We're just kind of dipping our toe in the pool of all these different topics. All right, hope you guys have a great day.